Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Barrow Group Theatre for this storytelling night, off-Broadway, as it says downstairs. I am Murray Nossel. I'm the co-founder of Narativ, with Paul Brody, who's in South Africa at the moment. And I am a very proud member of the Narrative Storytelling Circle, of whom there are so many people, members, present here tonight. And I'm also so happy to see new faces, people that we've never seen here before. So what you're going to be experiencing here tonight is something that I can't describe to you, because you will have the experience, and when you walk out of here, you will not be the same person that you were when you walked in, because stories change us. And I'd like to give you an example of this by telling you a little story. 9/11, 10th anniversary, it was about a couple of weeks ago. I woke up on Sunday morning and I went into the chest, the blanket chest that I got in my living room. And out of that I took a small plastic black box, and I put that into my backpack. And I walked from my home on Riverside Drive to Central Park. Now, in that black box were the cremated remains of two little old ladies, sisters, who were friends of mine. When Annalisa died in 2005, she was 94 years old, and she was outlived by her sister Elsa, who died just a couple of months ago at the age of 103. And Elsa had kept Annalisa's ashes with her at the dining table and spoke to them daily. So when Elsa died, finally I had the ashes. And I'm going along into Central Park, and there waiting for me is Barbara. Barbara is a professor of German literature from Berlin, and she was also a friend of Annalisa's and Elsa's. We walked together up this rise to where the benches are that overlook this emerald green lake in Central Park. It's just at 72nd Street. And Barbara and I sit there and we exchange our stories about these two ladies. And we say to one another how much we loved them. And we tell one another how we met them. This is how I met Annalise. It was 1989 and I was here in America looking for a job. Actually, I'd come here in pursuit of a girlfriend who on the very day that I arrived in America told me that she'd found a man who wasn't gay. And so I was left in New York City. Now, but why not find a job? Now, I was a clinical psychologist, and when I opened the New York Times, I saw all these opportunities for clinical psychologists, including a lecture given by the famous psychiatrist called Otto Kernberg, and the lecture was called Rage, Power, and Aggression. So I went along. And I find myself sitting next to the least likely person to be in such a conference on rage, power, and aggression, a little grey-haired lady. And I'm sitting next to her, and we get chatting, and she tells me that her name is Annalisa, and she speaks with a very refined German accent. Annalisa invited me back to tea, to high German tea at her apartment on Central Park West. We sat at the dining table, which was covered by a lace tablecloth. That is also where Elsa was already sitting, Annalisa's older sister. They produced an enormous selection of sausages and wursts from their favorite butchery on the Upper East Side. The tea was from McNulty's Tea and Coffee Shop in the West Village, and it was golden Assam tea. And as we ate our wurst, oh, and they also served these cakes. These German cakes, Kuchen of different descriptions, and little pastries with fresh fruit on top, and marzipan for dessert. And while we were eating all these things, Annalisa and Elsa would tell me stories about their lives. They would tell me, Annalisa told me about coming here to New York with a PhD in archaeology. But when she got to New York, She'd fled Germany in 1932. There were so many people who fled Europe here in New York with PhDs that she could only get a job as a baby nurse. And do you know what happened? When her boss, who lived on Central Park West, found out that her maid had a PhD, she fired her immediately. And Anneliese was out of a job. As we would sit there at the dining table, Elsa would say to me, "Did I ever tell you that I was in a concentration camp in Italy?" Yes, she had told me hundreds of times. They'd also told me about their teapot and its pattern. It was a white teapot with a delicate blue pattern on it. And they said that that was the closest thing they could find to the china that they'd had as children in Germany. And their grandmother, they said, had a teapot which was very, very similar to this one out of which we are now drinking tea. Anneliese died, and Elsa died. And I was invited by their attorney to come to the apartment to see if there was anything that I wanted. I went inside, and people had already started plundering this place for all the things. I walked in there, and suddenly I was confronted by the thousands of books on the bookshelves, and all the records, and all the little ornaments and things that they collected over all their years in New York City, and the tiny little things they brought with them from Germany. And I got a headache just looking at all of this stuff. I said to the attorney, "I don't know what to take." I took a few art books. I took a few little objects that Anneliese had obviously gotten on her archaeological digs, because I thought they might be of value, and I was kind of rather like them. And I was about to walk out of the apartment, when I suddenly turned and went into the kitchen. And there was a Formica table. And on the Formica table were all these yellowed recipe books in German, and lots of boxes and bottles of spices and foods. And underneath all of them, I saw the teapot. And I said to the attorney, "That's the thing that I really want. Please, can I have that teapot?" And he said to me, "Have it. It's yours." In that sea of stuff collected by two little old ladies, a teapot rose above everything. Why? Because the teapot had a story. The teapot contained their entire history. Their history of growing up in Germany, and their favorite teas that they had with their grandparents. The history of their exile, having to leave their country with nothing. The history of finding a teapot that reminded them of home. And the history of all those teas around that dining room table, and telling those stories of what happened to them. So I've been thinking a lot about the stories that rise above all the other stories. We all have a sea of stories that we can tell about our lives. Why is it that some stories rise above and want to be told? Those are the stories that you're going to be hearing here tonight. You're going to be hearing stories that wanted to be told, that wanted to rise up out of the rubble of our lives. So, now to the storytellers. Let me tell you how it all begins. A group of people walks into a room and forms a circle. That's how every single one of our narrative workshops and masterclasses work. Whether we're working with artists or filmmakers or novelists here in New York City, truck drivers in Kenya, or CEOs from large corporations all over the world, it's always the same thing. People walk into a room and form a circle. And then the participants in our workshops and masterclasses do exactly the same thing. That's at the heart of all of our work. They learn how to listen, and they learn how to say exactly what happened to them. That is the heart of our methodology. So, we don't have a circle here tonight. If we had a big enough room, we would have a circle, but tonight we're in a theatre. And we are going to be standing here, we storytellers, and you're going to be out there. But we want to create for you, as close as we possibly can, the atmosphere of what it's like to be in one of our workshops. We always start with the listening. So I'm going to tell you now, you who are the audience, that your listening and your presence in this theatre makes an enormous difference to the people who are telling their stories here tonight. How you listen is going to actually shape their stories. In fact, we say that the listening is like a cup, and the stories are like liquid poured into the cup. Just as the cup gives the liquid its shape, so your listening is going to give the stories their shape. So I'm going to invite you now to consider, how are you listening? What have you brought into this room with you in terms of listening? Perhaps you have some aggravations from the day. Perhaps you rushed to get here and that's still present in your listening. Maybe all sorts of things that happen during the day are in your listening. So be aware of that. Now, how are you going to listen to these storytellers? I'll tell you how we human beings habitually listen to one another. We listen to form opinions, to judge, to criticize, and to compare. Am I better than or worse than? Is this good or is this bad? Am I bored or am I not? You know, these are the ways that we habitually listen. Well, what we do at Narativ is we say that you can actually choose the way that you're going to listen. You can listen, and you can choose to listen in a completely different way than is usually your habit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and form with one another an intention of how you're going to listen tonight. So you might say, for instance, I'm going to listen to learn something, or I'm going to listen to discover something about myself, or I'm going to listen to bring the best out of the storytellers. Whatever you like, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to have this conversation. Please go. All right. Now that you've set up your listening, now for the storytellers. The majority of the storytellers that you're going to hear here tonight are from our most recent masterclass. These students attend 12 sessions, which they explore their lives and excavate their lives for stories. We also have a guest storyteller, who I will be introducing you to later, and there's also going to be one open mic spot for someone in this audience who wishes to come up here and tell your story. Now let me tell you that many different kinds of people come to our narrative workshop, and they come for all sorts of different reasons. You know, we have artists, we have screenwriters who are working on their screenplays, we have novelists, we have people who want to do a one-person show, we have doctors who want to learn how to connect better with their patients, we have lawyers, we have architects, we have the full range of professionals and non-professionals who come and want to learn the art of storytelling. And then we have some people who attend our workshops because for them, Narativ's methodology has become a way of life. How to listen, how to speak without judgment. I'm one of those people. This is a life practice for me. And the first storyteller I'd like to welcome up here tonight is also one of those people. It's Susan Calhoun. Susan has done all of our seminars and all of our masterclasses, and I'm so proud to introduce her to you.